Thank you all for foregoing the free hot dogs and sticking around. So I've got kind of a two-parter tonight. We're going to walk through a little bit of the research agenda and then some of the ways that I see the Arkansas Post program coming together. Before we do that,
I think that's on your computer.
Is it though?
Oh, is that the silver one? That
Yes.
goes to that? You might want to just use your computer.
Yep. All right. The disclaimers. First, the information presented is still in draft form, right? So there's going to be changes before the program comes together, but the great part about that is we have a year. The second disclaimer is that there is site information in the presentation. However, all those sites that we're going to be talking about tonight are on federal property, and so they're protected by federal law. It's more for you people watching at home. Hi. So, start with this quote from, I don't know, you say lesser known archaeologist from Arkansas? True systematic historical archaeology in Arkansas began, yada yada, Arkansas Post. Anybody know who said that? At least one of you does.
Some weirdo. I don't know.
Some weirdo. Our affectionate paper weirdo. Said that in his book. But I want to talk a little bit about the goals of the Arkansas Post project. And so, the overall goal of the 2014 training program is to understand the archaeological signature of the French Creole ethnogenesis or métissage at Arkansas Post. So, the people that are inhabiting the post, largely in the short period in the 18th century where École Rouge, or the memorial unit, was occupied, and then as they transition to the end of the 18th century and into the 19th century when the post becomes reoccupied. We have some great historical documents that give us some information. This is from John Beaupré, who is the trade factor at Arkansas Post 1805 to 1810 while there's the U.S. Trade Factory there. And when zeroing in on here is the idea of the families, 60, 70 families, with the exception of some from Pennsylvania, mostly are French, either from Illinois, New Orleans, or York. And there's some Canadian families that are tied in there as well. And what's fascinating about that to me is that when we look at the French colonial world and the way French colonial people are studied at the different locations along the kind of big blue crescent of the frontier of French North America, each one of those nodules of people from Acadie and Quebec all the way down to New Orleans are studied a slightly different way, depending on their unique situation between interaction with a native and African American and then French population together. So I really want to use Arkansas Post as a nodule in that kind of larger story. But what are we talking about? So we're talking about the Arkansas Post Memorial Unit. Has anybody who's been there or know where it is? Eric, that's a given. Thank you. Thank you for playing. Who hasn't been there and plans on coming next year? Right? Awesome. So we're talking Arkansas County, actually on the line between Arkansas and DeShade County. The park itself, here in green, the national park. And this project is, like all of our training programs, going to be a partnership. Right? It's a partnership between the society and the survey, but we have other project partners as well. Right? We're going to be working with the National Park Service, the Memorial Unit, the Arkansas Post National Monument, National Park Service property. We're going to be working with the Army Corps of Engineers as well. And it's been awesome to get to know Eric the last week here, not knowing that he was actually going to be here. For those of you who don't know, he's the park ranger that we're hopefully going to work with down at Arkansas Post on the Corps side. And so, not knowing we were going there next year, we just serendipitously showed up to learn about archaeology and this stuff. So we have 4 main project partners. We also have some support and consultation. Consultation has already begun with the Quapaw Nation, as well as with the Quebec delegation of Houston. Fun fact. So, Quebec considers its government to be a sovereign state within a state. Kind of in the way of a Native American nation within the United States federal government. Quebec considers itself as a province to be under the rule of a foreign power. And so, in such, they like to create embassies and consulates around the world. And because they're not a sovereign nation, they can't call them embassies and consulates, they call them delegations. And so there is a Quebec delegation in Houston, which is assigned Arkansas as a territory to include discussions between Quebec and Arkansas international relations. I called the Quebec delegation in Houston and told them about this project, and they were very excited to talk to me because they've never worked with Arkansas. Surprise! And then the PR director, she was very nice, and she qualified that statement and said, well, the current delegate, they're bureaucrats, they move around a lot. She's never been to Arkansas. I was like, this isn't getting better. But anyway, I kind of see working with the Quapaw and working with the Quebec delegation is very similar in that they're both descendant populations, right? They're ancestral populations that are occupying Arkansas coast in the 18th and 19th century. So if you're working with those folks as well. And then, I love this picture. There's myself in the middle, Judge Arnold on the left, and my predecessor, John House, on the right. And it kind of gives me an idea of what I may look like in 40 years, one way or the other. Yeah, that's terrible, terrible joke. But I've spoken extensively to both Dr. House and Judge Arnold about the projects, and they're both excited to help us out with that as well. So, start with some background. Arkansas Post, right? Big misnomer. It's not one place, right? Arkansas Post is at least 5 different installations in at least 3 different distinct geographic locations. Stole this one from one of Buzz's books, Judge Arnold's books. When you follow along a little bit here, we have Arkansas Post number 1 in the middle. It's Tonti's Post, 1686 to 1699. A little bit of a, well, in his own documents, Tonti calls it the city of Tonti in the territory of Arkansas. The city of Tonti, we don't believe, was ever more than 1 French cabin in the Quapaw village with maybe 6 guys. So it's not exactly a massive, bustling city. No metro system. But only occupied for a short time, and then the John Law colony pops up. You heard of the Mississippi bubble, right? Somebody had the bright idea of selling shares in a colony that never existed. Brilliant idea until it went away in the subprime mortgage bubble in a real bad way. But anyway, settlement did begin. While then a huge amount of settlers never showed up and colonists never showed up, the French government decided it's important enough to put a military post back there, 1721 to about 1749. At which point, the Chickasaw decide that they don't want a French military holding in the area, and they burn it out. Conveniently, the Quapaw had just left when the Chickasaw decided to get rid of the French installation. The relationship between the Quapaw and the French for the entire occupation of Arkansas Post has been pretty tight. And it was really the Quapaw who allowed the Arkansas Post to exist. And it was thanks to the neighbors that the French installation survived. So as soon as the Quapaw left, the Chickasaw decided that they could get rid of the French. So, what did the French do after they were burned out at Arkansas Post in 49? They followed the Quapaw and set up at what we call ARAS-UAPB, or the Red Bluffs area, which is now the National Monument. Hung out there until about 1756 when it was decided that the British thought they needed to control the continent and the French needed to protect their investment. And Arkansas Post, way up the Arkansas River, was way too far from the confluence of the Mississippi to have any interaction with convoys that were going to protect French interest along the Mississippi River. So they up and moved the fort from ARAS-UAPB down to what we call Fort Deschamps, a place that the French commandant, or his wife, I think it was probably his wife, but it's cited 2 different ways, called the most miserable place in the universe. Anybody who's hung out in Deschamps County in the Delta, you might feel that way. While the post is there, it switches hands at the Revolution to the side of the Spanish, right? And then the Spanish, at the end of 1779, decided to pop it back to ARAS-UAPB, where it was occupied. through the Spanish, switched hands back to Napoleon for a hot minute before he decided to sell it to TJ and Louisiana Purchase, and it becomes the United States. So we got a lot of different places. So not one place. Misnomer number 2. The Arkansas Post is largely used as a term to refer to just the military installation or the village directly around the military installation. It always seems to be there. That's a real short-sighted way of looking at it. The Post, while it had a core commercial district, if you will, and a military installation, there were always farmsteads, homesteads surrounding the site. We know very little about those occupations, and that's going to be one of the goals we're looking at. So I got 3 specific foci to kind of talk to you about. Number 1, we're going to look at the archaeological signatures of the houses of the ancient French and Spanish colonial taste that represent the primary dwellings of the French Creole people within the village of the Post. Right? Jumping back to that quote from Treat, it says at the bottom, all these families reside within the village. Right? We have some great documentation about the village itself, and almost as if, as the 19th century starts, the influx of Americans who are coming in, including Washington Irving, Audubon, are living within an archaeological site. They are observing that while some of these French and Spanish colonial houses are still occupied, they are literally falling down around the people that live in them. And that there's not the care taken care of them that once was. Because Arkansas Post is in a transition at this point from a colonial Creole town to an American territorial capital, and then as the capital moves to Little Rock and the birth of the state of Arkansas, kind of a territorial backwater. I want to understand how those people lived. That's the goal. How are the people living? So I got 2 areas I want to look at inside the actual memorial unit. Shown here in yellow and magenta blue. The difference between the magenta and the blue is actually a drop in elevation of about 6 feet, the edge of the bluff that comes down. And I'll talk about both of those in a second. We're going to start talking about the yellow. Real interesting point. We have very little idea of what that first École Rouge occupation by the French looked like in 1749. Very little documentation talks about that short French occupation after the Chickasaw burned them out at the Menard locality and before they moved down to Fort Duchesne. Really interested in what the archaeological signature of those homes look like. Now, here are images I borrowed from other sites, right, from St. Genevieve and Premier Rocher, Illinois, hoping that we're going to see this style of colonial house in the archaeological record. Both that yellow area, jumping back here I'm talking about, hoping that we're going to get something of this type from 1749. Piers, poteau en terre style construction, have you heard of that before? Post and ground, right? So kind of thinking of it as digging a trench and setting up a line of posts in the ground, having your house snuggled right up to that. Maybe there's a floor elevated, built on a few brick or stone piers. You know what it costs? Maybe just a dirt floor as well. So we don't know what that signature is going to look like for the 18th century. But when the 19th century hits, we have a bit more information about the occupation. There are both French-descended Creole people that are living on this coast, right? Right here is the area that's in yellow that we're going to be investigating at the intersection of Front and Main Streets. And there are a number of houses known to be there in the 19th century. This is what the site looks like today. A beautiful manicured sidewalk. This is where we believe the intersection of Front and Main is. There's the front of the Park Service's golf cart. And an absolutely gorgeous place to have a shaded open area excavation. Right on the edge of the Post Bend backwater. Lovely breeze, shade. We're going to spend some time there.
Lot of room.
Sorry?
Lot of room.
Lot of room. A lot of river. Second area I want to look at, and we may open both, we may not, depending on how things go with some early testing. But down here, this magenta and blue toward the tip of the peninsula, where some early documentation indicates we believe the first French fort was. And we have a little corroboration to that. We have this map provided by the Park Service for archaeological sensitivity. And I love it's labeled as survey polygon in blue toward the tip. And that is showing us where the early Preston Holder 1956-57 excavations were. Early historical archaeology, trenching across the tip of the peninsula. And while he declares in his report that he discovered the first French fort at the site, he only ever finds some French and Spanish domestic ceramics and doesn't really get any architectural remains. Fascinated to kind of go back there and take a look at hopefully reestablish those trenches, because this location is a complete guess. It's not geo-referenced by the Park Service completely currently, so that's something that we can help them do. And he says he found the 1749 fort you can see here on the map toward the tip of the bluff. The river line having changed quite a bit because the Army Corps does what Army Corps do, straighten rivers and raise river levels, and so we have a little bit of a change and shift there. So, the people inside the village is goal number 1. Goal number 2 is the homesteads outside the village. Habitant Coast is what it's called in the documentation. So, using treat again, within a circuit of between 3 and 4 miles, there is scattered up the river, these homesteads. And again, some great references from the late 18th and early 19th centuries about these homesteads. A dozen quite pretty houses on plots, 4x4 arpents, 14 acres each. And then Father Saligny, when he comes as a Jesuit missionary in 1832 to the French Catholic people that remain at the post, mentions it as well, including a brick house that was built and inhabited by, I'm going to say no thief, and you say it's but how do the locals say it? No tribute. No tribute? No tribute. Got to talk about that. Not Monticello. Yeah, no, gotcha. Come on. So, that same visiting father has a map showing these habitations along what we call the Habitant Coast. Each one of these individual homesteads moving out from the core of Arkansas Post down along the shoreline. And this is what it looks like today from Google Earth. Dr. Scott has volunteered to lead the site survey class in surveying this area along the coast of the Arkansas River, or the Habitant Coast, looking for those homesteads. And we have some clues. We have the maps to correlate to, and we have the long lot style agriculture, the split up of the early French and Spanish land grants that still exist in the property lines, where every landowner had access to the river, and then their property went back away from the river. That same thing is the way that same style of long lot seigneurial system property division would have been all the way up the Post Bayou as well, but a lot of those lines have disappeared. Some are still standing here, but the area coming down along the Arkansas River. And we're hoping to be able to relocate one of these homesteads that looks a lot like this. This is from de Montigny's discussion of the Mississippi River down further in Louisiana. And again, historical maps show us not only those long lots existing, but also the 1830 river bend and 1819 river bend, and hoping that we haven't lost too much of a degree of the shoreline, that hopefully some of those homesteads will still be extant and locatable by Dr. Scott and his teams. If not, we know that along the same Habitant Coast, there are remains of the Civil War fortification rifle pits. Those of you who visited the sites, some of the rifle pits are displayed for you on the top of the peninsula. None of them have been relocated on the east side of the river except for one segment way up at the confluence of the canal that's documented in a Mazda. We're hoping to relocate some of these rifle pits in the site survey as well. There's also a strong possibility of the late 18th century Qualpa village having remains just at where the canal comes across. Should be right about up here now. So that's goal number 2, Abington Coast. Goal number 3, in working with one of our project partners, the National Park Service, one of the major concerns they have about interpretation at the site is that they are missing some major features that they need to know the exact location of. One of them being this cemetery from the American town period, which is in the middle of the site as it's interpreted now in the trends. They feel that they need to locate that and that they could use our help with geophysics to locate and properly delineate that cemetery. Hopefully I'm going to have that as part of a geophysics class that will be taught by Dr. Lockhart again and added to the site for next year. If for some reason this area doesn't work out, another option is not all of those rifle pits have been relocated on the peninsula and ground truth, and so that is an option as well. This is the current road that comes in, and these rifle pits are open for interpretation. You can walk out there on the path, but there's only 50 meters or so of them that are visible above the ground surface currently. And we know that during the Civil War battle, the rifle pits went all the way across the peninsula, and then they continue where we're looking for them on the far shore. So, that's kind of the overarching research approach. Entering the second section of the presentation, I quote one of our own. When I asked the Circle of Wisdom about going to Arkansas Post, I got this as a response. The archaeology will be amazing. The environment will be challenging. Steve, you go. Thank you very much, Steve. But the benefit in working with a group like the survey is that in the last week, sitting around there and imbibing and eating all of the pub mix, I have had a great opportunity to talk to you all about the needs and necessities, some of which I had thought about ahead of time and some of which I hadn't. And I appreciate that. So I want to assuage some of any of your fears about going to Arkansas Post. Those of you that know, Arkansas County is a bit more rural than it is here. Go. Just go. So, I want to approach a couple of the major problems. Number 1, where are we going to stay? Sorry? There you go. So, we have, with the help of the Corps, thank you, Eric, I've chosen currently the Wilbur D. Mills Campground. It's a little bit, it's further away. There are 3 core campgrounds in the area. Wilbur D. Mills is the second furthest away, you put it that way. But it's the nicest, and it's a dead-end road. It's out at the southern side of the river at the Wilbur D. Mills Dam. It's a nice closed loop, and hopefully we'll be able to rent the whole campground with just us for the term. It has electricity. It has a new shower house that I have been in with showers and toilets on both sides. It's quite nice. Here is the stock photo that I stole from the internet of someone camping with this nice cover on the picnic table. Are the picnic table covers still there?
They are.
Okay, I didn't notice that.
Freshly painted just in time for your arrival.
Oh, well, thank you, sir. Look at the service here, people. Look at the service. Now, I know not everybody is going to want to camp. I totally understand. Oh, also with the camping, I think Sarah Shepard, before she left, did some research about renting campers, which is a possibility as well. So we'll get some information for you out there on that. But not everyone's going to want to camp even in a camper. There are some options within reasonable distance. The site in the middle in blue, the camp there shown in green. Dumas does have the Dumas Inn and the Days Inn. I have been told by competing people that either the Dumas Inn or the Days Inn is better. Everybody has their own opinion. But there's, yeah, Bob, yeah.
It's the Days Inn. You want to say the Days Inn?
do not say this.
Okay. I have heard the opposite as well. But Days Inn is the one I went with because I trust you.
Both are nice. now.
Blame Bob.
We're doing field work, so
Right.
it doesn't matter.
To the north, there's also the brand new Boyd Farmhouse. Motel, I think I'm calling it an inn, but it kind of looks more like a motel. And then I gave a presentation similar to this not too long ago at the Grand Prairie Historical Society's meeting. And I love the opportunity to work with some of the local people as well. It was in Gillette, in one of the church basements, not too far from the site. And this gentleman came up to me after and said, you know, when you're down here and you need a place to stay, I got something you should consider. And I was like, well, what's that? And he said, his duck lodge. He's the owner of the Old Post Duck Lodge. And he is a Menard. He's actually a descendant of the farm family who's the Menard Hodges site is named after. He's very interested in preserving the site, and he's offered to discuss with us the possibility of renting out his duck lodge, which is like 5 or 6 bedrooms as well. I think it sleeps like 15 people. So there are options. We got a place to stay, we need some food, right? So what about some food?
Yes, please talk.
I think that to ease the tension and make everybody a little happier, I'm going to make every effort to find a way to have a camp cook. We're going to be working really hard all day in the heat. It may be slightly buggier there than it is here. I'm going to talk about the bug. I don't want to hear anything from you after that. But I want to have some of those problems taken care of. A camp cook is something that is very doable, and I have some current leads on. Number 2, the community of Gillette, as small as it is excited for us to come. And I have at least tentative promises currently for 3 community meals. There are 3 different churches in town that are each offering to put up a meal currently.
How many are coon?
None. It's all chicken, Don. Maybe not get the joke, the coon supper is in Gillette. The very famous, the political event every year. You have to go and do that. I went this year. It wasn't as bad as I thought. If you get the leaner piece of coon, if you get any coon with fat on it, don't eat it. It's really gamey. The leaner coon is actually quite delicious. But the most fun is at the pre-coon supper party, which is run by another state senator in his pole barn on his farm. And it's like really good barbecue and open bar. So check that one out. But anyway,
Can we call the sign out with big?
we'll work on that. I absolutely am committed to keeping the red beans and rice and jambalaya dinners. Suggestion was brought out that we should really, for that kind of a big familial meal, that we should find an interior space to do that. I haven't done that yet, because I've been here, but I'm going to talk to the churches about using their facilities for that. I've been to 2 of the 3 church facilities. Both of them would house this comfortably, but I can't promise that because I haven't asked them about it yet, but I will. There are also options in Dumas, where there's one of the hotels, and there's options in DeWitt as well for the hotels. 27 and 37 minutes from the site proper according to you. So, right. In terms of groceries and supplies, here is just a basic outline for you. There is an open Dollar General currently in Gillette and the Gillette Gas and Goods. I called yesterday. The Dollar General in Gillette sells bags of ice, 7-pound bags of ice, only the cube ice for $2.29 including tax, as of yesterday. That may change. Sorry? They don't have block ice. They have bags of ice cubes. They don't have blocks. Yeah. The Gillette Gas and Goods gets an alternate between block ice and cubes. They don't know what the guy is going to deliver on the truck. So they get what they get. Ice is also a concern that has been brought up, and we're looking into both mobile refrigeration that we could plug in at the campground, as well as bringing ice in en masse, whether it be in massive Pelican-style coolers that are heavy insulation, or whether it be by renting an ice machine to actually bring it, so that no one is struggling without ice. This is the end dead end.